the centre submitted a fresh application in the Supreme Court on Sunday, questioning the maintainability of a clutch of petitions that have demanded legal validation for same-sex marriages in our country. The centre said courts cannot rewrite an entire branch of law by recognizing the right of same-sex marriage because they say creation of a new social institution is beyond the scope of judicial determination. They also added the petitions before the court reflect urban elitist views for the purpose of social acceptance. Submitting a fresh application on Sunday, the centre also maintained that the petitions before the court reflect urban elitist views for the purpose of social acceptance, as I mentioned, which cannot be equated with the appropriate legislator mirroring the views and voices of far wider spectrum of society. The Union of India, in a second counter affidavit filed in the Supreme Court, has made these points and has again opposed the petitions which seek legal recognition for same-sex marriage in our country. Let's go across to my colleague Arvind Gunasekar, who joins us live at the moment over the phone line. Arvind, the centre has submitted a fresh application in the Supreme Court opposing same-sex marriage. What details can you share with us currently?
Mr. Centre has filed an application in the Supreme Court ahead of the Supreme Court Constitution bench taking up the pleas seeking recognition of same-sex marriage. So Centre in its application before the Supreme Court has asked the Supreme Court to first look into the maintainability of this particular matter. Though the Supreme Court has constituted 5-judge bench to hear this matter, but the centre has asked the Supreme Court not to get into the merits of the matter, but instead look into the maintainability of maintainability of this particular issue, because centre's contention before the Supreme Court is that this squarely enters the domain of legislature, and judiciary cannot intervene into this particular matter. In fact, the centre has told the Supreme Court that it's up to the legislature to recognize a union as a marriage, but judiciary cannot do it. It should be left to the parliament or the legislature to come up with its own law on this particular issue, and the judiciary should not enter into this particular domain, seems to be the stand of the centre before the Supreme Court. In order to buttress this argument, the centre has also told the Supreme Court those petitions that have been filed merely expresses or voice the opinion of urban elitists, but also only the parliament or legislature can look into the voice, can consider the voices of rural India also, and that's where the centre has asked the Supreme Court to first look into the maintainability issue of this matter instead of getting into the merits of the matter. Not just centre, Parmeshwar, even states like Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh have also filed application before the Supreme Court asking themselves to be included in this particular matter. So tomorrow, when the matter is taken up before the 5-judge bench of the Supreme Court, not just the centre but also states like Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh will also be heard, along with NCPCR, which has also filed a petition in the Supreme Court saying that first the maintainability of this matter should be decided before getting into the merits of the matter.
Arvind, as always, thank you so much for joining us with the latest update. Tomorrow is a big day. All eyes on what happens in the Supreme Court tomorrow. We are also going to get an update from my colleague Sunil in a bit, but for all those tuning in, the centre has submitted a fresh application in the Supreme Court on Sunday, questioning the maintainability of a clutch of petitions, as my colleague Arvind Gunasekar mentioned, that have demanded legal validation for same-sex marriages in India. The centre said courts cannot rewrite an entire branch of law by recognizing the right of same-sex marriage because the centre claims creation of a new social institution is beyond the scope of judicial determination. Meanwhile, the centre also said petitions before the court reflect urban elitist views for the purpose of social acceptance. As I mentioned earlier, this is the second affidavit that the Union of India has filed in the Supreme Court, again opposing the petitions which seek legal recognition for same-sex marriage in our country. While contending that marriage is an exclusively heterogeneous institution, the counter affidavit actually states that those seeking marriage equality in India merely represent urban elitist views for the purpose of social acceptance, and that the popular will of people is that marriage be recognized solely amongst heterosexual individuals, is what the centre claims so far.